Welcome back to the Mandarin Blueprint Podcast. My name is Phil Crimmins. This is podcast number 153. And if you're unfamiliar with the Mandarin Blueprint Podcast, it is a Q&A podcast where we talk about the comments on the community forum underneath the lessons in the Mandarin Blueprint Method video course, and of course, any emails that come in. And we also talk about certain things related to the course that are a bit more specific towards the end of the podcast. But you can count on the fact that whenever you listen to the Mandarin Blueprint Podcast, there's always going to be little hidden gems of Chinese knowledge, but also how to keep a good attitude while you're studying, how to maintain it over a long period of time, which can be very tough. You can have times in your study process where, some days you're very energetic and full of purpose, and then other days you just want to take a nap. And so how do you stay motivated for such a long-term project that is going to follow you through the gamut of human emotion and human moods and how you're doing day to day? So you'll always find some good and helpful tips on the Mandarin Blueprint Podcast. So before we get into any of the Q&As today, I'd just like to give you some updates. As we speak, our assistant is getting ready to publish the intermediate course stories. They're finally ready. We have all of the stories moved over to our website, and it's just a matter of getting the links into the lessons and double checking that all the lessons have the correct text in them. But big thank you to Ija, who was the person who coded all of the lessons to have this great text tracking, and it's really awesome. It's quite a good experience to have the text tracking the way it is, because what you can do is you can actually click on any sentence as it's on the screen, and it will start the audio from that point. And that is particularly useful for so say first you read and watch and listen to the whole text, and you've got the text tracking, so where the audio is highlighted in the text, and you read through the whole thing. And there's a particular sentence that you want to hear again, or you want to shadow. You can just keep clicking the sentence over and over, and since it starts right when you click, it's particularly good for shadowing, because the idea with shadowing is you're supposed to read, speak, and listen at the same time. So if you know exactly the starting point, because it's exactly when you click, it really is super helpful. So that's coming out very soon. The intermediate stories, you'll be getting an announcement on the intermediate course about that. If you're not to the intermediate course, not to worry. That's totally fine. If you're in the intermediate course already, then you'll want to check those out ASAP. So if you're in the foundation course still, it's essentially just news that the intermediate course that you'll eventually get to is going to be now improved. And another note on that is the vocab boost lessons are also almost ready to go. I'm just getting the flashcard deck prepared for it. We got all the audio files for them, and I'm just placing them in the right spot. And so that very soon will be ready to go, including another 112 sentences, 112 usages of some new words we've been adding into the intermediate course based on the new HSK. So I've talked about that on a few previous podcasts. I won't go into too much detail here, just to say that it's almost ready to go. Another thing, the Mandarin Blueprint GoFundMe is still happening for the advanced course and getting that out. In the past 10 days, we've gotten 2 $500 donations, one from Soren and one from Clifford. And so thanks so much to both of you, because you gave a $500 donation. When the advanced course comes out, you'll be getting that for free. And we really appreciate the support. Any donation helps. It's a massive help to get the ability to work on it without sort of fretting too much about our financial situation as a company. If I was freed up to help Luke with getting, new people into the course, we could, obviously have two minds focusing on the same program, but I am focused on building the advanced course. So what it does is it divides our attentions, and it makes it a little bit harder for us to get new members into the course, just not because Luke's not doing a good job. He's doing a great job, but it's just a matter of if both of us were doing it, two heads are better than one. So the fact that my attention has to be entirely on the advanced course means that any donations that you guys can make to the GoFundMe just helps us stay afloat while we do this. And I feel super confident that once the advanced course is out and I can focus more of my energies on, doing things like making blog posts, going on other people's podcasts, spreading the word about Mandarin Blueprint in more organic ways, and then also coming up with ways to, advertise better, get more people learning about it. That will, and then also having the advanced course in our sort of arsenal will be really helpful when the time comes for that. So just thanks so much to anybody who has donated to the GoFundMe, and we really appreciate that. Now, speaking of the advanced course, I have now planned out through characters 2700. There's still a little bit more work to do on 2600 through 2700, but that means that we're very close now to the end. We have about 315 characters to plan out. Now, of course, once they're planned out, there's a process of preparing the lessons and all of that, but it's the kind of thing where anybody who has donated to the Mandarin Blueprint GoFundMe or is a lifetime member will give access to that as they come out. So look out for that moving forward. And yeah, so this is what's going on there. Now, I have one more thing that I want to mention, but it kind of relates to the first question. So let's get into the first email from Michael Rotchford. He's been a longtime member of the Mandarin Blueprint Method, and he's actually sending this email as a reply to a conversation we had with Christine and Rebecca on the podcast about being study buddies. And so I've left the link to that conversation in the podcast show notes if you'd like to check that out. So let's see what Michael says about that, and then I'll have some more comments about some new changes we're making. So he says, "Hey guys, after completing the intermediate portion of Mandarin Blueprint, I have to admit I am very excited for your next section. I believe that it took me around 18 months to get here. I guess it was about halfway through the intermediate course that I started to get this craving for learning so much more vocabulary. It was driving me nuts, the feeling that I was just, quote unquote, this close to having a major breakthrough. I never cut out any sentences though. My feeling for me was that I need to know the vocabulary, and the sentences provided a solid method to hone my understanding of the words, as well as a constant reinforcement of vocabulary I had previously learned, moving my understanding of characters to knowing words. Sure, I had wanted to ditch the sentences many times so I could just learn new characters, but for me, understanding words was more important than having a lot of characters under my belt. That being said, I have added more words to my vocabulary than have been in the course so far, and I found interesting as well as my own sentences to go with them. I guess this all goes to show you how great your method is. You can take many different approaches to satisfy the individual wants and needs of each person. It is not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. For me at this stage of things, I could easily learn 50 new characters in an hour. I figure it took longer to add a character to Anki than to come up with my movie, but I'm not in a race, and I know I am getting closer to that level of fluency that I am seeking. I do think the metaphor shouldn't be climbing a mountain. Maybe that was at the beginning of your course, but rather I feel like I am walking down that mountain, and it's starting to snow, and you guys have just handed me a pair of skis. Though all of this has been a great trip and has been fun and exciting at every turn. Thanks, guys. I am still having a blast, Mike Rotchford." Yeah, so really interesting comments here from Mike. And, one of the things we talked about in that conversation with Christine and Rebecca was the way that when you get into the intermediate course, the sentences can start to get a bit overwhelming because naturally as you gain more characters and you so if you have 1,500 characters learned, then character number 1,501 can combine with any of the previous 1,500 characters. There's 1,500 possible combinations for a new word. So naturally you're going to have more words unlocked as you get deeper into the course. And so if there's a sentence for every usage of every word, it can start to feel like, wow, there is just a lot of sentences for each new character, and it's a bit overwhelming, and I want to learn new characters, so it can slow me down from that goal of learning new characters. But as Mike points out, you can approach the course in several different ways. In fact, we're going to make this more explicit at some point in the intermediate course very soon, where to make it explicit that the sentences become optional. And we still recommend that you read through each sentence on the course platform itself. But as for unsuspending the flashcards, you can choose to do that or not, because there is this kind of point where there's different points in your study life where the layer of analysis that's most important shifts. And in my experience, and also, thinking about it from the way the Mandarin Blueprint method is, which isn't something I used to learn because obviously I made it after I learned Chinese, but with Luke. And the growth process is like, of course, at the beginning you have to start with pronunciation, and then you have to move into learning character components and characters, and you have to keep doing that and making that a major focus while also learning how they combine to make words. And then you go through this long period where you're doing all of these things, but you're learning sentences and you're getting to the actual language itself. So the grammar level, the sentence level, the paragraph level becomes kind of the most important level for a period of time. Now, it doesn't necessarily stay that way because eventually you've seen enough sentences and you've seen enough patterns of grammar that you can use that previous knowledge of grammar to more quickly learn words down the line, in which case it no longer is the most important thing for you to be doing to read sentences. It's to get your character order finished so that you can read anything. Because you go from, all right, I have a basic understanding of grammar. And we're not saying don't read at that point. We're definitely saying read. But what we're saying is that if you at some point sprint to the end of your characters, and you do some cursory reading along the way, then by the time you get to the end of your characters, you go back to reading being the most important, but you can read almost anything because there's, the vast majority of characters that are going to show up in any piece of text. It's not just like graded texts. You can pretty much follow anything. Now, the good thing is that we're still going to make sure we have a sentence for every word that exists in the language. Every word not in the language, in the course, which it covers all the HSK vocabulary plus, several thousand more words. And if every usage of every word has a sentence that we're for sure is comprehensible at the level you learn the word, then what we can be sure of is that if at any point you want to surgically study any given word, you have the resources to do so. But it is true that at some point there's a law of diminishing returns for how much each new sentence gives you. Because if you learn a new sentence and it's a grammar pattern you've never seen before, that's a pretty important sentence because it's giving you something new. But if you've seen that grammar pattern 20 times, the new sentence that has that same grammar pattern isn't helping you as much as the first sentence that gave you the grammar pattern for the first time. So the idea is that at some point you've seen the vast majority of grammar patterns several times, at which point the next key is to sprint to the end of your character learning. And so exactly when that moment is it's pretty clear to me that it's somewhere in the intermediate course, but maybe a few levels into the intermediate course, we'll say, all right, from this point on, sentences are now optional. Your main priority should be finishing your characters and, read through the sentences, go through the new vocabulary unlocked lessons and just, read through them so that you get better understanding of the character. But then, you don't have to unlock any sentences unless you particularly like one or there's one that gives you, some kind of, thrill to read or whatever, then I'm sure add it to your flashcards, but no need to do so. The key is, because like what Michael was saying, if you can learn 50 characters in an hour, you don't have to, it's not that long. Like, let's just say, you've got 1,500 characters and you learn 50 characters a day even. Well, that's only 30 days, right? So if you can get finished in, say 30 to 90 days from the middle of the intermediate course to the end of the advanced course in terms of characters, then going back and reading through the grammar-based stuff is going to be way easier. You're going to know all the top-down words already, and so it'll be really comprehensible. And then you read the graded readers, they're going to be really comprehensible. And then you can even find lots of things in the wild that will help you. So, these are all really helpful ways to, these are all super helpful ways to go through the course. And like Michael said, it's not one size fits all. It's sort of the general path that you're following. But, if you stop and smell every rose in the path, that's one way to learn about what's the nature of the path. Or you can, stop and smell the ones that you think are interesting, but mostly just follow the main trunk of the tree. I'm mixing metaphors and it's great. All right, let's move on to the next comment or question. This is an email from Terry Lee. She says, "Hi, the reason I want to learn Mandarin is because my mother-in-law and two sisters-in-laws are Chinese living in Benxi near Shenyang. I was fortunate to be able to visit them with my wife in the early fall of 2018 for 6 weeks. I had a very good time in spite of having no ability to communicate. Basically, I nodded, ate, and smiled a lot. So upon returning to Florida, I decided to see if I could learn a little Mandarin in preparation for a future visit. My wife, who is Chinese, suggested that I find a course as she could tell me if I was doing it wrong, but would not be able to really tell me how to do it right." Yeah, just as a comment on that, that's pretty much why we made Mandarin Blueprint. It's like the average Chinese teacher, while obviously fluent in Mandarin Chinese, isn't necessarily qualified to empathize with what it's like to learn as a Chinese as a second language student. So, continuing. After casting around some, I finally settled on the yǒuyòng Chinese course. Earlier in my life, I'm 75, I lived in France for 25 years. Before going, I decided to try and learn a little French. At the time, there was no internet, so I had a French lesson book. With it, and eventually books from the library, I was able to learn how to read actually quite well. Before going, I remember reading Solzhenitsyn's Pavillon Cancero, a French translation from Russian. Of course, I could not speak well, had a horrible accent, and could understand almost nothing folks said. But after living a while, it started to click. With yǒuyòng Chinese, I did her beginner course and about 2/3 of the intermediate conversational course. I coupled it with complete Anki cards in both directions with audio, pinyin, and character text. In spite of this, although I did learn a lot of words, I had a very difficult time remembering tones and really had a lot of trouble recognizing speech, phrases I should have known. I understand that I am not a spring chicken, but somehow I felt I had hit a major blockage. So after 2 years of daily effort and with my wife telling me that my pronunciation is awful, I decided to look around to see if there wasn't an approach that suited me better. I have heard of memory palaces before and even read an article by a guy named Mullen that talked about using such a technique to learn Mandarin. However, it was more theory and not a guide that was complete enough to be of use to me. Eventually, I stumbled on your course. I was interested in starting over on pronunciation, given my wife's opinion on how I was doing. Also, a different approach for memorizing sounded good. Finally, since I first successfully learned French by first learning how to read, the idea of learning of characters and reading them as a foundation seemed like an approach that suited me better. Yǒuyòng does have a character course, but she doesn't recommend it until after completing intermediate conversational. So after 2 years of effort for so little foundation to stand on, I decided to start over with your course. Understand, I'm not criticizing Yǒuyòng. I probably learned more than I'm aware of, but my progress was slowing and I didn't see how I was ever going to get to the point where I could read. After 2.5 months with you, here is what I think. For the pronunciation course, which I did first, I think it is helping a lot. I'm still doing the daily flashcards that are due, and even my wife says that I am improving. So this is good, although I still make mistakes. For the blueprint course, I'm in the middle of phase 2, level 10. A, the movies are going well. I am able to link characters with corresponding actor, sets, scene, story. My recall is quite strong. B, for props is a little tougher, but I am using the following order of select image associations. 1, an image that looks like the character works best. 2, an image that somehow ties back to the movie where the character is introduced. The image is one step removed from the character itself. 3, an image that is related to the meaning of the character. This is the least desirable because it is 2 steps removed from the character via the definition than the movie. C, for Vocabulary Unlocked, 2/3 character and words, this is the most difficult. It seems that I am much better at images than lived experiences, where I have not had much luck yet. But it is still not very easy to come up with images that associate well with multi-character words. And unlike props, I do not have a good strategy for linking them to their underlying characters. Even so, I'm doing okay so far, but I'm a little concerned this is eventually going to be a problem. In summary, I'm happy with how it is going so far, and I enjoy my daily study sessions consisting of Anki review and average around 4 lessons a day, approximately 1 character, and all it entails. Thanks, Terry Lee. So that's great to hear. Obviously, it's good to hear that you have a wife who's going to give you objective feedback, and she's telling you that your pronunciation is doing well. It's not surprising to me. Our pronunciation course is pretty solid. And, it's like obviously I am a fan of, I think she calls it yo-yo Chinese these days, yǒuyòng. I like her course, but is a thing of disagreement that I've always had with her is that I don't think that Chinese is easy enough to learn conversationally for many people without having the foundation in the characters if you're an adult. Like, obviously, if you're a kid, that changes things around a little bit, changes the equation. But if you're talking about adults, I think Chinese has too many homophones to justify focusing only on spoken Chinese at the beginning without that foundation of understanding the differences in the written language. So that's, obviously the opinion and the philosophy behind why Mandarin Blueprint focuses so much on reading. So that's point one. Next, the movies are going well, which is great. That's going to help you a lot. It's going to help you with your tones, right? Because you're going to know exactly what the tone is based on the room you're in the set. So that's awesome. And the prompts, for both the prompts and the vocabulary responses that you gave, my intuition, and also this isn't just intuition, it's based on a lot of solid evidence from what people have given us as feedback. It's these things get easier as you go along, especially the prompts. I mean, you end up using prompts so much. But for the vocabulary, you were saying you're having some trouble remembering certain images and lived experiences. But, bear in mind, one, in phase 2, this is going to be the most difficult it will ever be because it's a new concept, right? So it's the early stages. You'll get better at it. 2, the using this technique for vocabulary is only really necessary for your foundational learning, and we stopped doing this in the intermediate course because you don't need as much help through images or lived experiences, because what you get starting from phase 3, which you haven't yet started, is grammar understanding. And once you have understanding of grammar, then you can learn a new word, not just from the lower level by combining 2 characters that you learned via the Hajna movie method, but also from above by seeing the word in the context of a sentence or in the context of paragraphs or several paragraphs, which really helps you grasp a word, because you're not just dealing with the bottom-up approach, you're also working from both sides. And like a character, if the character happens to be a 1-character word, then you can use a sentence to learn it. But if it's just a character and then it combines into a 2-character word and then you use it in a sentence, well, that isn't as easy to jump 2 layers. So you're looking at 1 character by itself and then you jump 2 layers to a sentence. It might not be as comprehensible, but if you've already learned the word because you learned the 2 characters and then you see that 2-character word in a sentence, it's much easier to learn. And so really the images and the living links and the lived experience and all of that, that's just a stopgap until you have enough grammar understanding to be able to learn either bottom up by knowing the characters or top down by knowing the grammatical structures. So that will get easier as well. So keep it up. Don't worry too much about what will happen. It'll actually get easier as you go along. So thanks to Terry for that question and feedback. Gerardo Medina in the community forum, he says, 大家好,我叫 Gerardo. I'm very excited to start this course. After a 10-year gap in my study of Chinese, I started again last year and got my HSK 3 certification. Congratulations. I've got a question. In order to study for the HSK 4 level, where should I start this course from? Level 1 is too easy for me. Thank you, Gerardo. Well, we have an article all about how intermediate students should approach the course, so I believe we sent you that article, but I would just mention that it's a little bit tricky because the HSK 3 from last year is now old, and they've updated it. So the HSK 3, the new HSK 3, is actually around the same level as the old HSK 4. So interestingly enough, you may end up taking what is called the HSK 3 again, because they've updated all of them. So the vocabulary, it's the number of words in the HSK 3 is higher, and the number of concepts it covers is higher than the previous HSK 3, and it's much more akin to what the old HSK 4 was. Now, the way we've set up the course is that the foundation course covers through the HSK 1. The intermediate course covers through the HSKs 2 and 3. The upper intermediate course, which is not released yet, still in production, is going to cover through the HSKs 4, 5, and 6, and then the advanced course will cover through the HSKs 7, 8, and 9. The 7, 8, and 9 are brand new. They didn't exist before. It stopped at HSK 6, but again, there's a whole new setup now. So that's how the course is going to shake out starting... Well, I mean, it's how it currently shakes out, and then it's going to, as we get the upper intermediate course and the advanced course done, it'll cover all those levels. So that's how that works. Annette Bicknell by Community, she says, is it just me or do others also experience that writing the character in the correct manner goes out the window when recalling a character going through a scene in the head? I write the character according to the order props show up in the story, which is not how the character should really be written. I try not to do this, but it comes naturally with recalling the scene. I feel like I am fighting instinct on this one. I should say that writing a character in the correct manner does flow and look better because the props in order writing looks awful, but I do end up with the right character. Thoughts? Well, I think that you should write the character how you recall it when you're doing your Anki card, and then when the card flips over, make sure you follow the stroke order GIF and do it the same way as the stroke order GIF. And the reason behind that is that it's not, in my experience, you start to get a feel for stroke order if you just follow the GIFs. And it's not something that you need to particularly focus on too much. You just need to do it correctly, and the GIFs are right. So just do it correctly, and then eventually you start to get a feel for just how it works in general. It's not something you have to put a lot of conscious energy on, in my experience. So if you write it, in the wrong stroke order when you're doing your initial before you flip the flashcard, but you still got it right, you can still mark yourself right, and then just practice writing it the correct way a few times, and then, my prediction is that it won't take very long until you just naturally are starting to write them correctly. I think this is a short-term problem that will cease to exist as long as you follow that instruction. So, yeah. Brandon L. on Compound Final IOU, he says, hey, Mandarin Blueprint, I'm going through the PM course again, and I'm getting real mixed up with the Y initials. The Y is not said like it is in English, right? But when I hear y'all speak it, it certainly sounds like that way in yan, yo, yang, yong, and yao. I know it's supposed to be the initial I, E, but it sounds like a Y to my ears. And when I try to say it as E instead of yi, I say it incorrectly. Could you all clear this up for me? I think I am confused about something or otherwise psyching myself out. Yeah, all this really comes down to is that, well, first as a reminder, the Y is just there for spelling. It's just a combination of vowel sounds. So for example, I, o, u, I, o, u, I, yo, yo, right? So if you break down yo into I, o, u, it sounds like a Y because I-O, yo, yo, yo. It sounds like you're going y, but that's just the sound that naturally kind of happens when you're saying I-O, U next to each other, or I-A-O, yow, yow. I'm not emphasizing the y sound there. It's just I-A-O naturally sounds that way. And so auditorily it sounds that way, but there's no extra emphasis that I'm putting on the Y because the Y sound in terms of saying y'all, right? Like y'all. That is not a sound in Chinese. But it can be that it sort of auditorily sounds very similar simply as a result of putting those vowel sounds together. So that's really what's going on here. I would just say that. Oh, and I will also mention that suppose that you accidentally put that extra Y emphasis on there. It's not something that's going to make you misunderstood. It's not such a problem that it's if you add that Y sound, then for sure Chinese people are not going to know what you're saying. It's not like that. It's not that big of a problem, but it's just in the pronunciation mastery course, we want to be quite accurate in the instructions. So technically it's not there, but even if you added it, it's not that big of a deal. So, yeah, that hopefully answers that question. Next, we have Anne Giles on Make a Movie for She says, I tried to make a context for myself for things currently happening. How does this look? 我吃了米饭. I ate cooked rice. 我吃着米饭. I am eating cooked rice. and 我会吃米饭. I will eat cooked rice. Yeah, I mean, these are all technically correct, and you've got the basic idea. And, it's interesting how with 这, and this is one of those things that there is not an objective answer to when it comes to when you do this or when you don't. But there are certain conventions of speech. So, for example, 我吃着米饭 is grammatically comprehensible, but most people would probably say 我在吃米饭. 我在吃米饭. And that is the same meaning. But for whatever reason, there are certain verbs that tend to get placed with 在 or 正在, which both mean presently happening. And there are some verbs that tend to get placed with 这. And there's some verbs that tend to get placed with 呢 at the end of the sentence. And exactly which ones, it's just kind of conventions of speech, and they even vary from region to region. So certainly, if you're just thinking about it from a grammatical formula, there's nothing wrong with the sentence. But it just happens to be, like when I say 我吃着米饭, it feels weird. It's not that, again, it's not that it's wrong specifically. It's just that I don't really ever hear people say that. They usually say 我在吃 something, right? Now, yeah, so that's kind of the idea there. Now, you tend to use 这 with things like something that you're doing simultaneously with something else. So like, 我站着说话. I'm standing and speaking. So like I'm speaking while standing is kind of like how you could think of it. 我站着, 站 means to stand, or 我坐着录播课. 我坐着录播课. I'm sitting and recording a podcast, right? So there's things that they're kind of like states. They tend to be sort of states of being, like I am in the state of sitting right now. I'm not like in the act of eating. There's sort of like a difference there that's of kind, where 这 tends to get used with things that are kind of the state that you're in at the moment. I'm standing, I'm sleeping, and many times these present tense verbs get used together. So 我在坐着. 我在坐着. In a way, you could say it's redundant, but they do tend to get used together sometimes. So 在 can mean present tense. 正在 can mean present tense. 这 can mean present tense. And 呢 at the end of a sentence can be present tense. And you could use them all together. So 我正在坐着呢. 我正在坐着呢. Right? So that would mean I'm sitting. And I could just say 我在坐, or 我坐着, or 我坐呢. But all of these are kind of like, they're all technically correct. Which one is actually a convention and which one you will say day to day is just going to depend on your listening and all of that. So hopefully that's helpful. John Nomura on Vocab Unlocked from Zhong. He looks at this sentence. 他把同学的脸打肿了，所以父母都被老师叫来了学校. He hit his classmates' face and made it swell, so his parents were called to the school by the teacher. Is that translation correct? Pretty much. So the first half of the sentence definitely makes sense. 他把同学的脸打肿了. So that's a classic 把 sentence where you've got the object, which is the classmate's face, and what happened to it? It was hit 打, with the result of swelling, 肿. So that's fine. The first half of the translation is fine. So his parents were called to the school by the teacher. I think the one element of this that John is overlooking is the do something something le. So if I were to change it, that means already. So essentially, so his parents were already called to school by the teacher. There's an emphasis on it already having happened. So perhaps they got into a fight, and very soon after it's like, the kids still crying or something, and the teacher has already called the parents to show that there's urgency to the situation. But that's it. Other than that, good translation from John. Jason Pan on 拉肚子 in context, which 拉肚子 means to have diarrhea. Simple question, but is 在 optional when expressing at noon, position and time, since I do not see it here? For example, 我在中午 拉肚子不舒服. Or no, 我在中午肚子不舒服. Yes, you can say that. A lot of times with time, you omit 在, and it's not really necessary to say. You might say it if you're trying to emphasize that point. So if I would say 我在中午肚子不舒服, that would tell me that what you're saying is that you're trying to emphasize that it was noon. No, it wasn't the morning. It was noon, around noon or the midday that I was, my stomach was uncomfortable. So that's just how it feels to me when you add the 在. But a lot of times when you're just saying a time of day, it's not necessary to say unless it's a particular point of emphasis. It's not necessary to add 在. Ben on 主要 in context. 公司的活动主要是什么? What is the main part of the company's event? If you wanted to ask what is the company's main event, what would you change? Well, it's funny. It's really easy. You just switch the position of 主要 and 活动. So 公司的主要活动是什么? Right? That would make perfect sense. So 活动主要是什么 is what is the main element of the event. So there's one event. But if I say 公司的主要活动是什么, it's saying what is the main event. Just a direct translation. 主要 main, 活动 event. So yeah, pretty straightforward. And Giles on Make a Movie for 的 or day. Another request for disambiguation. We've got day, must, more authoritative and commanding. 需要, need, more conditional. How about 必须, must? So day still feels a bit more authoritative than even 必须, but 必须 is also, very much like there's no two ways about it. Like you got to do this thing. And so it's pretty authoritative. And the difference is very subtle. I wouldn't really, like that type of difference is the kind of thing that it's hard to even articulate other than you just tend to use them in the right place after you get enough practice with it. But I can't even disambiguate them in my own mind because they're quite interchangeable. So I would say that, the difference between them is subtle enough that you don't need to worry about it. At this point, with all my years of speaking Chinese and reading Chinese, I can't come up with a hard and fast rule that differentiates between them. Day does feel more authoritative to me than 必须, but 必 means certain, right? So it's definitely, 需要 just has this kind of idea of like, it's just the difference between must and need. It's just the same way it would be in English, but like the difference between must and must, well, it's like they're pretty much the same. Day feels more authoritative, but it's just a feeling. It's not really anything that I can objectively point out. Austin Brewster on Nasal Final IONG. How should you react when someone tells you 不用谢? Sometimes older people say this to me when I thank them for something, but I'm not sure if I should insist on thanking them or just smile and nod. Yeah, there's no need to say anything beyond when you say 谢谢 and they say 不用谢. Now, to a Western ear, it sounds like they're refusing your thanks, but it's just another way of saying you're welcome. Because no need for thanks is essentially saying you're welcome to my service of whatever it is I did for you. I held the door for you. Like, there's no need to say thanks because you're welcome to my help. So it's just another way of saying you're welcome, and so you don't need to, like, they don't even really have a you're welcome response, because the other common you're welcome response is 不客气, which is basically saying, like, don't be polite. No need to be polite. You know what I mean? So it's all kind of getting across the same idea, which is that because you're welcome to it, there's therefore no need for thanks. So yeah, that's kind of how that works. Jason Pan on 杀 in context. 猎人没有一刀杀了狼，而是把狼的肚子切开，把奶奶从里面救了出来. The first part, 猎人没有一刀杀了狼, reads more like the hunter did not have a knife to kill the wolf because of yo. Am I missing something? Yeah, so it's not he has a knife. It's 没有 as a negation for past action. So 我没有开门. I didn't open the door. It's just a negation for something in the past, right? That's what 没有 is used for, or 没 by itself, but either way. Now, another way to say that, another thing that 没有 is used for is to say I don't have something, but it's both. It has both definitions. So in this case, it's a negation in the past. Now, 一刀杀了狼, 一刀杀了狼, 刀, what is your grammar module tell you that Dao is doing here? Well, we have a number plus a something and then an action. So in this case, it's actually a measure word for a blow of a knife. 一刀, 两刀, right? So there's blows of the knife. So 一刀杀了狼, he didn't kill the wolf in one blow. Instead, he opened the wolf's stomach to get the grandma out. This is from Little Red Riding Hood, obviously, right? And so, so just to point this out, this is this is a measure word, and also I wanted to point out something else interesting about this, which is that sha, because sha completely and utterly ends something's life, you almost always use it with le, because technically le refers to completed actions, a change, or a complete and utter end to something, right? And so that's why you'll hear somebody say, 我要杀了你, 我要杀了你. That would mean like, I want to kill you, but it sounds wrong because at first glance it sounds wrong because there's a le, and it's like, why would you combine yao and le in that way? But it's because le can be used to mean completely exterminate, and so that's my teacher in Sichuan University, You Lao Shi. He actually he did some research on le about this particular point, and I read his article about it. It's fascinating. But yeah, that's another point that's interesting about that bit. Tina Clark on 以上 in context. 以上的话我只给你一个人说了. What I said above, I've only told you. Does this apply only to written text? I'm picturing someone referencing an email or a letter. Is it ever used to reference speech, meaning something like what I just said, I've only told you? I can imagine someone saying 以上的话 if they were like giving a speech, and so like actually referring to the words they said above. But that's because if you're giving a speech, there's kind of this sense that you're reading down a page, right? If you were going to speak to something that you've just said and it was just a casual conversation, you might say 我所说的话我只给你一个人说了, right? That might be what you might say. So 我所说的话, so 所 is short for 所有, which means all, right? So all the words I've said to you, I've only told you. Or you might just say 这些话, right? These words, this that I've said to you, right? That's another way you might say it. Saying 以上的话 in a casual conversation would feel a little bit weird and formal. But you could totally say it in texts, right? Because in texts, then you're dealing in like directions. So like when you're talking about text, there is text that is above and there is text that is below. So there's a space there, right? Whereas when you're talking about things that you've said, you're only really dealing with time. So like it's like things I said before. You might say something like 我刚说的话, like what I just said, or 我以前说的话. It might be something you would say. So like, but 我所说的话 is probably a pretty easy way to get across what I've just said, essentially, George J. on 为了 in context. 他为了我的事吃不下饭. Could you also say 吃不到饭? And if so, would the meaning be different? So 吃不到饭 sounds to me like like you have picked up a fork full of or a chopstick, maybe a chopstick of a piece of something, and because you're bad with chopsticks, it falls out and it doesn't end up in your mouth. So you attempted it and you 吃不到, right? But 吃不下 is more like I can't eat, I can't get anything down, because I'm stressed or whatever. So yeah, it would kind of change the meaning. It's technically correct, but I think like you wouldn't find much cause to say that because 吃不到 is like you can't pull it off. The act of eating, you can't manage to successfully do it. But 吃不下 has this more feeling like get it down your gullet, and there could be all sorts of reasons for that, like, I'm just too stressed, I can't eat, right? George J. on ling in context. How would you show the difference between another versus the other in Chinese? I think it would often be clear from the context, but would it be ling 一个 in both cases? So, yeah, I mean, so like, it kind of is the same. Yeah, like one is another one, and another is the other one. And it's just context-based. I mean, obviously there are other ways to say other. You can say 别的 or 其他 or 其余. But these are usually more than one. So if you're saying the other one, like there's this one and there's the other one, it usually tends to be 另一个 in both cases. Sarie on 每天 in context. What are the reasons for using 天天 versus 每天? Well, there's not really much of a difference in meaning. It's just a kind of convention of speech. So, you don't always say things the exact same way. You have a different, that was exceptional. It was excellent. It was outstanding. There's different adjectives, different ways, different adverbs, and it's just a different way of saying the same thing. I can say that 天天 tends to get used with certain activities. So, for example, if you're saying 祝你天天开心, I wish you happiness every day. You tend to say that as 天天. So you'll use 天天 in like things that are more general, maybe things for particular habits that you have, like, but the thing is, so could 每天, right? So it just depends, but 每天 is a bit more common, but 天天 is also, I mean, any measure word you can double up and it means every one of that measure words. So 每天 or 天天, they're just the same conventions of speech, giving you options for how to say things. Sometimes 天天 strikes me as a little bit more rhetorical, but like only slightly. Generally with things like that, it's just a matter of having more than one way to say the same thing. Jason Pan on 拉 in context. 男朋友拉着我的手散步. I get the whole hand holding, but 散步 at the end is hard for me to understand why it's happening during that time. I would have expected a 散步的时候男朋友拉着我的手. First of all, that would be fine, but there's nothing particularly wrong with this sentence. I think that it's just a matter of emphasis. So Jason sees the holding hands to be the emphasis, but it's not really the emphasis of the sentence. The sentence is 男朋友散步. How did he 散步? 拉着我的手散步. So the emphasis of the sentence is 散步, right? That's the predicate. And so if you said 散步的时候男朋友拉着我的手, that would mean, that's more an emphasis on the hand holding. So that's the difference. It's really just a matter of where the emphasis is, but there's certainly nothing wrong with the sentence. The sentence is just, it's just subject predicate, 男朋友散步, and then what we call a 定语, where you're putting, actually in this case it's a 状语. It's a modification of the action. So yeah, that's what 拉着我的手散步. Another one from Jason Pan on 拉 in context. 他拉着花往外拔，拔到和他家的桌子差不多高. So this is a sentence from the Patience short story. Can you help me break this down for me? 他拉着花往外拔, specifically how 往外拔 means pulled up. So 拔, it's the opposite of plugging in something. It's like pulling out, right? So, and then in what direction? 往外. So from the flower's perspective, 他拉着花, so pull the flower. What direction? Well, towards the outside. 往外. And then what's the verb? 拔 is to pull out. So 往外拔. And that's, so yeah, like ba is kind of like almost the result of the pulling, right? And so 往外拔. And then he has a second question here, which is also, is 加 to express desk? Does 加 help to specify an ordinary table into a desk? No, it's saying 拔到和他桌子差不多高. So that would mean pulled until it's as tall as his table. Which table? His 家的 table, right? So remember that you can often omit 的 when it's next to something you're very intimately related with, like, say, your house. So 他家 is 他的家的桌子. So it's the table that's in his house, the table that belongs to his house, as it were. Not just any old table, it's the table that belongs to his house. So all that is specifying is that it's a table in his house, not just his table that could be anywhere. So 家的 is modifying 桌子 to say it's the table of the house. So yeah, hopefully that explains those 2 points. Rick Angleland on 跑 in context. What's happening in 小猫看了看他 with the 2 看? If I was trying to translate the English sentence, I might go for 小猫看他了. So, as we established before, 看, any verb can be doubled up, have verb verb, or have verb 以下 to mean for a moment. Now, if you're doing that in the past tense, though, so if I say 小猫看一看他 took a look at, looked for a moment at him. But if I want to say, or looking for a moment in the present tense. But if I wanted to say it's something that happened, so it's like I'm telling a story and this is just I'm giving the different events of the story, then I would say 小猫看了看他 to indicate that it was just for a moment. Like, instead of it just being like, it's like he looked, sorry for those that just listen to the audio, I'm staring at the camera, right? So that would be, 看他. There's no indication that there's any change, right? But if I say 看了看, it's like look for a moment. So look away. So that type of thing. So that's the difference between those 2. And that it's 看一看, but you're just adding le in between. So 看了看. Rick Angleland on 跟 in context. For 对身体不好, would it also be okay to say 为身体不好? You don't say 为身体不好. It's just a convention. 对身体不好, because 对 includes treatment as well. 为 is just for in general, but like when you're talking about things you put in your body, it's like the treatment of your body. Bit of just a convention. It's not like this is, a Chinese person wouldn't understand what you mean when you say 为身体不好, but like they always say 对身体不好. So that, yeah, it's just you'll get used to it. Jason Pan on 快乐 in context. He says, 童年和小时候有什么不一样? 谢谢. So if you wanted to ask that question a little bit more clearly, 童年和小时候, he wrote 什么不一样? 有什么不一样? Or 有什么区别? But, 有什么不一样 is clear. And it's basically saying, what is the difference? Is there any difference between them? And so, yeah, so what are the differences? And there aren't really. 童年 is childhood, and so is 小时候. The only real difference is that 童年 is a bit more formal. And so you'll say 小时候 in spoken Chinese a bit more. But again, as we've emphasized ad nauseum, just because something is formal doesn't mean you can't use it in spoken language. It just means you'll sound a little bit more, professional. I don't know. Jason Pan on 奶奶 in context. 小红帽有个奶奶，今年70岁了，一个人住，在比较远的地方. So, 比较远的地方 is the literal translation of 比较远的地方, a relatively far away place. Yep. Pretty straight up, 比较. It's just a matter of degrees. So it's like, 远 by itself is far. 比较远, relatively far. 很远 is far. 非常远, very far. 特别远 extremely far. So you get the idea. Next, we have a few vocab living links. So these are recommendations for how to remember vocab words. So 荷兰 on Vocab Unlocked from 运气. She said, I'm trying a roulette wheel. Mobile energy bringing luck. Yeah, sure. Absolutely. And so that's a good connection to 运气, which means luck in general. Jacqueline St. Ange on Vocab Unlocked from 休息 and 休息日. She says an out-of-the-office automatic email reply. Now, I think that's probably fine. For a vocab living link, that's probably fine. Now, that's a bunch of text, and so maybe you want to have, like, something that really stands out about that. But, like, imagine somebody's email reply was a little hologram that popped out of your iPad or whatever and it was like, hey, I'm out of the office because I'm at the beach drinking margaritas or whatever. That makes it a little bit more 3D to remember. But as an image that you put in your flashcards, probably fine. George J. on Vocab Unlocked from 动, 活动, 自动, 运动, 活动, how down, hoe down, right? So 活动, hoe down, right? And that's an event. That's quite an event to happen. So who doesn't like a hoe down, Hajna on Vocab Unlocked from 前, 以前, 前天, 前面, 往前, 前边. For 以前, I put a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, but not sure if that's okay. That's absolutely okay, sure. Something that was from long ago, 以前, by means of before is the way you can think of the past. So perfectly fine. And for a long time ago, you might also 很久以前, 很久以前. That's how you say, long ago. So that's how that works. But either way, making that connection to the Star Wars opening is perfectly fine for that. And that'll do it for this week's Mandarin Blueprint Podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next week.